In December 2000, as the new millennium dawned and aviation executives dreamed of an era of unprecedented scale, Airbus launched the most ambitious commercial aircraft ever conceived. The A380 would carry 555 passengers across 2 full decks in a typical 3-class configuration, with a wingspan of 79.8 meters and a takeoff weight of 560 tons. Engineers called it the superjumbo because nothing in commercial aviation had ever come close. At the time, it pushed Airbus to its absolute financial limits. Development costs would balloon toward $30 billion. Tooling required entirely new factories. For 2 decades since, aviation has accepted a painful truth. The age of the giant 4-engine airliner is over. Twin-engine jets won. Efficiency always wins. But Airbus didn't just build the A380, it had designed a far larger version, the A380-900, a stretch capable of carrying up to 900 passengers in an all-economy class configuration. Airbus marketed it to Emirates and Singapore Airlines. Airbus had airlines lining up. And then in 2010, Airbus killed it. The A380's wings were already built oversized, the structure was already engineered to be stretched. The tail, the landing gear, the entire platform was designed from day one to grow longer and heavier. Stretching it should have been easy. The hard part was already done. Yet Airbus panicked and shelved the one variant that might have saved the entire program. So, how does a company abandon the easy version of the plane it just spent $30 billion building? To understand why Airbus bet against its own creation, we need to understand why the A380 was built oversized in the first place. When you scale an aircraft up, the economics improve dramatically. The fixed costs barely change. You still only need 2 pilots in the cockpit. You still need 1 set of landing gear, 1 tail, 1 nose, but you spread those costs across far more passengers. Jürgen Thomas, the Airbus chief engineer, revered as the father of the A380, explained this precisely. Scaling an aircraft up by 100 to 150 seats drastically improves per-seat economics because the fixed physical and operational costs remain virtually unchanged. This was the entire logic. Airbus wasn't just building a big plane, it was building a platform. The A380-800 was always intended as the starting point. The real prize was the stretch. So, Airbus made a fateful decision. It engineered the wings, tail, and structure to support a much heavier, longer aircraft than the 800 actually needed. The wing was sized for roughly 650 tons of future capability, but the 800 only weighed a maximum of 575 tons at takeoff. The physics were unforgiving. A wing built for a heavier plane is too big for a lighter one. That oversized wing created drag the 800 didn't need. It added weight the 800 had to carry. It made the base model less fuel efficient than it should have been. John Leahy, the legendary Airbus sales chief, called this a mistake. The decision to build the A380-800 too heavy so the platform could be optimized later for the 900 resulted in a deeply suboptimal aircraft. Airlines, he noted, were forced to put up with compromised economics while waiting for a stretch variant that would justify the overbuilt structure. The trade-off seemed acceptable at the time. Suffer the slightly inefficient 800 today, reap the rewards of a perfectly optimized 900 tomorrow. Everything depended on that stretch arriving. The entire business case was built on it. Then, in November 2007, Airbus publicly confirmed the plan everyone had been waiting for. The A380-900 would extend the fuselage by 6.4 meters. It would stretch from 72.7 meters long to roughly 79 meters, finally matching the enormous wingspan that had been waiting all along. The numbers were staggering. A standard 3-class layout would seat about 650 passengers, nearly 100 more than the 800. In a full high-density economy configuration, the aircraft could theoretically carry up to 900 passengers. This was the plane the wing was actually designed for. The oversized structure suddenly made sense. maximum takeoff weight would rise to accommodate the extra passengers. The same wing that was too big for the 800 would now be properly loaded. The aerodynamic penalty would vanish. And the airlines came, sort of. Emirates expressed interest, Singapore Airlines expressed interest, so did Virgin Atlantic, Cathay Pacific, Air France, KLM, Lufthansa, and the leasing giant ILFC. Emirates in particular favoured the 900 over the 800. Tim Clark, the Emirates president, whose airline would eventually buy nearly half of all A380s ever produced, believed the stretch was essential. He believed it would deliver better unit cost economics, the only weapon a four-engine giant had against the new efficient twins. This was the moment of maximum ambition. Airbus had a plane the market wanted, a structure already designed for it, and the most important customer in the program, pushing hard. The easy version was right there. What Airbus discovered, however, was that stretching the A380 represented one of the most deceptively difficult challenges in modern aviation. On the surface, everything pointed to a simple project. The wing was ready, the tail was ready, the landing gear was ready. But the modifications extend far beyond the fuselage, because that's pretty obvious. You see, certifying the A380-900 would have required billions of dollars in additional flight testing, tooling, and production setup. Every stretched fuselage requires new structural analysis. Every new structural analysis requires fresh certification. Every certification adds years. And then there was the evacuation problem. Regulators mandate that any commercial aircraft be fully evacuated in 90 seconds or less. To certify the baseline A380-900, Airbus executed a harrowing test in Hamburg on March 26, 2006. The aircraft carried 16 Type A emergency exits. Volunteers evacuated 873 passengers and 20 crew in just 78 seconds, with only minor injuries and one broken leg. It was a triumph, but it also revealed a hard mathematical ceiling. Regulations allow a maximum of 110 passengers per pair of Type A exits. With 16 doors, the A380's absolute certification cap was 880 passengers. A 900-seat or 963-seat A380-900 would have exceeded that limit entirely. Airbus would have needed to engineer entirely new exit configurations into an already overweight fuselage or risk a multi-million-dollar evacuation test where a single pileup could permanently ground the variant. By reducing the planned seat count, Airbus reduced risk. By accepting fewer doors, it limited capacity. By limiting capacity, it undermined the very economics that justified the stretch. The easy plane was becoming an engineering and regulatory minefield. And then there was the money. But before committing further billions to the A380-900, Airbus confronted a financial reality no aircraft program had faced so brutally before. The mathematics were catastrophic. Airbus had estimated it needed around 270 sales to break even on the A380. Later, that figure was revised upward to 420. Total A380 orders eventually reached just 251. These were not theoretical losses, they were measurable, mounting, balance sheet-threatening realities. The program was fundamentally incapable of generating the returns Airbus needed. And here lay the paradox that trapped the entire company. The only way to make the A380 platform economically viable for airlines was to launch the highly efficient 900 stretch. But the only way to save Airbus from financial ruin was to stop spending on the A380 entirely, and instead pour capital into the twin-engine, clean-sheet aircraft. To save the plane, Airbus had to spend money it didn't have. To save the company, Airbus had to abandon the plane. So in May 2010, Airbus postponed the A380-900 indefinitely. Officially, it was to stabilize 800 production and focus resources elsewhere. Unofficially, the stretch was already dead. In December 2014, CEO Fabrice Breguier mentioned a potential A380neo and stretched variants again. Tim Clark publicly dangled the prospect of replacing his entire fleet of 140 A380s with an upgraded version. A new engine, Clark argued, would give an improvement in economics of up to 10 to 12%. But the market support never materialized outside the Middle East. Not even the Middle East, Emirates alone. The words faded into nothing. Airbus built the A380 on one foundational belief: the future of aviation belonged to massive hub-and-spoke operations, funneling enormous passenger volumes through a handful of mega airports. Under that belief, a 900-seat aircraft made perfect sense, but the entire premise was crumbling beneath them. Boeing made a completely different bet. Instead of maximizing capacity through one giant four-engine vehicle, Boeing prioritized frequency, point-to-point routing, and twin-engine efficiency. The result was the 777, and then the 787 programs. The 777 evolved into the 777-9, the longest commercial aircraft ever built. It carries roughly 426 passengers in a two-class configuration, fewer than the A380, but with comparable range and massive cargo capacity. And it does it on just two engines, two GE9X power plants, each producing upward of 105,000 pounds of thrust. Twin-engine aircraft also eliminated the financial nightmare of spoilage, the devastation an airline suffers flying with 150 to 200 empty seats on a weekday. A 900-seat A380-900 would have made that spoilage problem catastrophically worse. The bigger the plane, the bigger the empty seat risk. I know, it's almost backwards. The variant designed to improve economics would have amplified the single greatest financial risk airlines feared most. The stretch wasn't just hard to build, it was solving the wrong problem for a market that no longer existed. But the deadliest threat to the A380-900 didn't come from Boeing at all. It came from inside Airbus. By 2010, the same year the stretch was propositioned, Airbus executives had recognized that the A350 represented the true future of long-haul flying. The A350 was a carbon composite twin-engine widebody, offering superior point-to-point capability and fuel efficiency the A380 could never match. Pouring billions into certifying and tooling the A380-900 would have directly cannibalized sales of Airbus's own A350-1000, the largest variant of the A350 aircraft family. Worse, it could have tied up critical engineering talent desperately needed to fight Boeing's 787 and then the upcoming 777X programs. Airbus was being forced to choose between two of its own children, and the four-engine child was already losing. The four-engine market was dead, strangled by the sheer efficiency of massive twin jets, rendering the A380-900 irrelevant before it ever left the drawing board. So Airbus made one final, desperate attempt to save the A380 without spending on a full stretch. When the A380-900 was definitively dead, Airbus introduced the A380 Plus at the 2017 Paris Air Show. The goal was simple: add 80 seats without the massive expense of physically stretching the fuselage. The execution was ruthless. Airbus engineers stripped out the beloved grand spiral staircase at the front of the aircraft, replacing it with a cramped, purely functional square set of stairs to squeeze in 20 more passengers. Engineers did the same at the rear. Aerodynamically, the A380 Plus required literal surgery on the wing. Airbus altered the dihedral angle, added a 30mm recamber, and bolted on massive 4.7-meter split scimitar winglets to eke out a 4% fuel burn reduction. Maximum takeoff weight rose to 578 tons. Most controversially, Airbus proposed an 11 abreast economy layout, squeezing seats from a comfortable configuration into a denser arrangement. To do it, Airbus stripped out the deep storage bins beneath the windows, pushing seats flush against the outer skin. This destroyed the airy, spacious feeling that made passengers actively seek out A380 flights. The A380 Plus became a cattle car configuration that sacrificed the aircraft's only remaining advantage, unmatched passenger comfort, for marginal economic gains. No airline bought it. The demise was now complete. Most airlines could not rescue the A380, even if they wanted to. the economics presented an insurmountable barrier. Filling a 555-seat aircraft profitably required dense, high-demand routes that simply didn't exist outside a handful of mega hubs. Infrastructure presented another barrier. The A380 required specialized gates, reinforced taxiways, and dual-level boarding bridges that most airports never installed. Network geometry doesn't support the superjumbo from most locations. The aircraft only made sense when one airline funneled enormous volumes through a single hub. Emirates could do it from Dubai, almost no one else could. Crew, maintenance, and the sheer operational complexity of 4 engines added further weight to the case against it. The belief that global travel would consolidate into massive hubs collapsed. Passengers wanted frequency and direct routes, not transfers through giant connecting airports. Airbus built an empire on the hub-and-spoke vision. That vision became less convincing the moment efficient twins could fly long, thin routes profitably. As engines improved and twin-jet range extended, more city pairs became viable for direct service. Bypassing the very hubs the A380 was built to feed. In February 2019, Airbus announced it would cease A380 production by 2021. Emirates cut its order from 162 to 123 aircraft, replacing the rest with A330neos and A350-900s. Production ended in December 2021 when Emirates received the final of 251 delivered A380s. The dream of the stretch died permanently. One abandoned variant didn't just scale down a plane, it scaled down an entire era's ambition. The A380 has experienced an unexpected final act. When the pandemic decimated travel in 2020, airlines declared the A380 economically obsolete, sending their A380s to boneyards. But Sport's plan relied on the timely delivery of the Boeing 777X. When that program slipped, airlines found themselves trapped in a capacity nightmare. Faced with explosive post-pandemic demand, carriers were forced into a humiliating U-turn. The plane everyone declared dead refused to disappear. Emirates now plans to operate its fleet of over 100 A380s well into the mid-2030s, investing in multi-million-dollar cabin retrofits. Qantas, British Airways, and Singapore Airlines continue using the A380 on slot-restricted routes, where maximizing passengers per landing is essential. But the second-hand market is grim. In many cases, the engines are worth more than the aircraft. In December 2000, Airbus launched the A380 because it believed the future belonged to giants. It engineered the wings, the tail, the entire structure for a stretch that seemed inevitable. The A380-800 was always meant to be the small one. The plane was built too big to ever grow. 2 decades later, the A380-900 represents the complete opposite of inevitability. Not a triumph delayed by circumstance, a deliberate retreat forced by mathematics, infrastructure, and a market that chose efficiency over scale. The oversized wing that was supposed to enable greatness instead became a permanent burden on the only version that ever flew. When the final A380 rolled out of the factory in December 2021, it carried within its overbuilt structure the ghost of the plane it was always meant to become. 251 aircraft delivered, an abandoned stretch, a handful of operators flying a magnificent anachronism. Proof that sometimes the most significant decisions in aviation aren't about what gets built, they're about what gets cancelled in panic when the numbers finally tell the truth.